Okay. Can everybody see that? It's good. Thumbs up. Perfect.
Thumbs up.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for joining everyone. I'm so excited there's so many of you. If at any point, Devin, you guys can't hear me or something's going on with my presentation, just let me know. Feel free to turn on your microphone or tell me in the chat. But things should run smoothly today, so we'll get started. So just a little bit about myself. That's me being brave, holding a rattlesnake. I've been a biologist for about 7 years in BC, and I've studied snakes for about 4 years. I studied snakes in my master's, which I'm still working on in Kamloops here. And I studied them actually in southern Okanagan, so Soyuz, BC, which is right at the border, so really close to US border. So that's where I'm most familiar with snakes. But I grew up here in Kamloops and lived here my whole life, so I'm pretty familiar with them around here too. But today, what we're going to learn about is, first off, we're going to learn about snakes in BC. So I'm going to teach you all about what different snakes here look like, what's special about them, and hopefully when you're out walking around, you can identify or figure out who's who. Next up, we're going to learn about what I do, so what a snake biologist does. So I'm going to show you some cool videos and some photos of myself in the field and what exactly we do for a job. Lastly, the third thing in our lesson plan is to learn what the word threatened means. So when I say threatened, I mean that in a way that a biologist learns what the word threatened means. So we're going to learn that at the very end, and it's very important for what I do. Okay, so starting off, let's learn about some snakes in BC. So I started off with one of my favorites, the Western Yellow-Bellied Racer. So you'll notice this snake has a really big eye. So it's got big eye with a round pupil. And sorry, guys, I just realized my MacBook's about to die. So hold on 1 second. Let's just charge that. Okay, we're good. So it's got a big round pupil and really round pupil, which means that they are not venomous, so they don't have fangs. And they also have these beautiful bright yellow bellies, hence their name. So they're called the yellow-bellied racer for a reason. They also have kind of a grayish blue color on their back. And sometimes people call these snakes blue racers because they have that color, but they are called yellow-bellied racers. If you ever had a chance to hold one of these snakes, they're really smooth. So their scales are really soft and they're not bumpy or hard like some of the other snakes I'll talk about today. These snakes are really fast. So racers, I love their name because they live by it. They race around in the environment. They're really, really fast and they're actually amazing climbers. So sometimes when I'm out hiking, I feel like something's watching me and I look over and it's usually a racer in a shrub staring at me. So they're pretty amazing little creatures. Next up, we have another special snake. It's called the desert night snake. Now, this snake is extremely special because there's not a lot of them in BC, and there's only been about 50 of them found. I actually found one in 2017 at my study site, and these are photos of the snake that I found. So I was very lucky, and I had to take a bunch of information and send it off to people because they just aren't around very often, and people don't find them. Now, what's special about the desert night snake is this really cool pattern on their neck. Kind of looks like he's wearing a scarf. So they have this unique pattern on their neck. They also have really small eyes. The reason these snakes have small eyes is because they're usually active at nighttime or early in the day. So when it's darker. So they don't need big eyes to see. Instead, they have these smaller eyes and they use other ways to detect things in their environment. Another thing that's special about this snake is they're very small. So this is an adult snake next to a pen. So look how small that snake is next to the pen. They're really not that big. And that was something that surprised me when I found it. I thought I was dealing with a baby, but it was actually an adult. Okay. Next up, we have the common garter snake. This is probably a snake a lot of you are familiar with because they're really common. A lot of people call these snakes garden snakes, and they're actually called garter snakes. But the reason they call them garden snakes is because they're often found in gardens. So these type of snakes really like wet environments. So you'll find them in maybe ponds or streams next to water. That's because they're really good swimmers. They're super, super fast, and they like to eat fish and frogs. So they're really amazing swimmers. These snakes have big round pupils, just like the racer did, big round pupils and big round eyes. So they have really good sight, and they are not venomous. So they can't harm us with their fangs. They also have beautiful yellow striping, which is quite easy to see if they're in like a green environment or grass. You can see that striking color. They're very beautiful. And they also have these little red markings that I like to call kiss marks. They look like someone gave them a bunch of smooches along their body. Okay. Now there's actually two other types of garter snakes. So there's not just the common garter snake, there's these two types as well. And they're very similar. They love being in water. They're good at swimming. They have those big eyes, same kind of striping, but they're just a little bit different in appearance. Okay, so next up is the rubber boa. These snakes are really cool. I know I said the racer was my favorite, but I think rubber boas might actually be my favorite. And that's because they're really calm. They're so nice. And if you're afraid of snakes, if any of you are afraid of snakes, these are the best ones to be around because they don't move very fast and they usually just coil up in a little ball. Now, these snakes are often called as the two-headed snake, and that's because they actually have a tail. Notice in this photo, it kind of looks like a head. It's the same shape, and that's for a reason. What they do is they stick that tail up, just like it is in that photo, and they tuck their head under their body and use that tail to confuse predators. So maybe a hawk or a bird is attacking the snake. Instead of attacking its really sensitive eyes or mouth, it attacks the tail instead. And that's really good because you wouldn't want your face to get hurt, right? So instead, it gets its tail attacked and it can escape safely. These snakes also have really small eyes, and that's because they are active at nighttime or early in the morning in those darker hours. And they have really smooth scales. So their name is rubber boa, and that's for a reason. That their body almost looks like rubber, and it's super, super smooth and soft to touch. Okay, next up, we have the sharp-tailed snake. This one is probably the most forgotten snake when people talk about them in BC, and that's because there's not a lot of them. These snakes are endangered, which means they're at risk of becoming extinct. And what extinct means is they're no longer here. So there's very few of them, not like maybe 4 or 5 have been found. And they are really special snakes. They have this unique sharp tail, which again is a hint at their name, right? So they have this sharp tail. And what they do is if they feel threatened, they'll use that sharp tail and maybe poke it into say you were holding one, it would poke it into your hand to say, hey, leave me alone. Or if it's being attacked by something, it might use that to defend itself. These snakes are found on Vancouver Island or the Gulf Islands. And the reason why they're not doing so well, we don't really know, but we assume that it's probably because they're losing their habitat or where they live. And so that's likely because there's more humans moving into those areas, they're losing their habitat, and they're not doing very well. One thing we do know about them, which honestly, we don't know a lot about these snakes. There needs to be more studies done by people like me. But we do know that they like to eat slugs. So that's pretty cool. Not many snakes eat slugs, but these guys do. Okay, these snakes are often referred to as bull snakes, but they're properly called Great Basin gopher snakes, or gopher snake for short. These snakes are the biggest snakes in BC. They're massive. They can be 2 to 3 meters long. I've caught some really big gopher snakes in my time working with snakes. They have really big round eyes like the racer did. And so they don't have fangs. They're safe. They won't, they won't hurt you if they bite you. They have this really cool stripe that goes across their eye down to their cheek. And I like to call that their bandana. It looks like a little bandana that they're wearing. And every gopher snake has that. They also have these really cool rectangular splotches on their. Now, these snakes are special because they attack their prey or what they eat by wrapping really tight around them. So this gopher snake is actually wrapping around my arm. He's squeezing really tight. Obviously, he can't eat me, but he was trying to wrap around really tight. And that's what they would do if they were trying to kill their prey or maybe a mouse. They would wrap around really tight and then eat it. You'll notice the bandana on this picture and the beautiful rectangular splotches. Okay. Another thing that's cool about gopher snakes is they actually are pretty amazing at finding food. So this is a gopher snake trying to get eggs out of a bird nest box. So see the gopher snake, and this is the bird nest box over here. Oops, sorry, right there. So notice how the gopher snake is using its amazing constriction ability and then stretching its body across to the bird nest to try and get some eggs that are inside there. Now, this isn't normal. Usually gopher snakes will get eggs off of the ground because that's way easier, right? This is a lot of effort. But obviously this snake knew there was a good meal in there. So it was working pretty hard to get it. Another thing about gopher snakes is that they're often mistaken for rattlesnakes. And that's because they look pretty similar. So on the left here, we have gopher snake patterning. And then on the right, we have rattlesnake patterning. You'll notice that the gopher snake is rectangular, like I mentioned. And then the rattlesnake is more of these big halos or circles. Okay, big brown circles with kind of a white outline. And they have that all along their back. So in this photo here, I have 3 snakes in the basket. How many rattlesnakes do you think are in here? You can feel free. I don't know if they can put on their audio, but or maybe in the chat, if they want to mention what they think. How many are rattlesnakes?
2.
2?
1. 2. 2.
Oh,
2.
there's lots of 2s, and you know what? That's correct. Good job, everyone. It is really hard to tell, but there are 2 rattlesnakes in here and 1 big gopher snake, okay? The rattlesnakes have these halos, but they also have rattles, right? So that's a really good way to tell. But sometimes you can't see that rattle, so it can be hard. Oops. Okay. So now we're going to talk about, now we're going to talk about rattlesnakes, which are the snakes that I study. So rattlesnakes have a lot of amazing things that they can do. They're very special snakes. They have these beautiful eyes that are actually vertical. So if you ever have a chance to look at, maybe if you have a cat at home, look at their eyes. You'll notice that their eyes are the exact same. They have these vertical pupils. And that's because small animals like snakes and cats use their eyes like that to judge how far away their prey is or what they're going to eat. So if they're trying to figure out where a mouse is, this type of eye helps them do that. They also have these really cool pits on their mouth. So they have a nostril, but they also have another little space that's called a pit, a heat pit. And what these do is they help the snakes see in the dark. So these snakes can actually sense heat coming off of us, or maybe something they want to eat like a mouse, and they can see that. So to give you an example of what a snake might see at night, here you go. So that's a mouse, and that's what a snake would see using those heat pits and detecting the heat coming off of that mouse. Rattlesnakes are also very unique because they have their rattle, and they use that as a warning signal. Can everybody hear that? Thumbs up. Awesome. So that rattlesnake is telling me that I'm too close. She's warning me with her rattle. So I'll play it one more time so everyone can hear it. It's pretty loud. That's just one snake. So you might notice that she has paint on the end of her tail. That's not normal. Rattlesnakes don't have rainbow tails. That's from me. But I'll tell you guys more about why I put paint on their tails a little bit later. The main thing that you need to remember now is that rattlesnakes use their rattle as a warning signal. And so they'll tell you when you're too close or when you're threatening them or scaring them. So rattlesnakes have that rattle. This is a natural rattle right here. So there's no paint on there. This has obviously been painted by us. So they have these beautiful long rattles, sometimes shorter, and they have triangular heads. So if you are looking at a gopher snake versus a rattlesnake, the rattlesnake has more of a triangular head. And of course, they have these big fangs because they are venomous. So that means they have venom inside these fangs. So if they want to attack something, they'll bite them with their fangs, put the venom inside whatever they're biting, and then release. And they do this very fast and then retreat, go hide somewhere and wait for the venom to do its work. Okay, so they're kind of lazy hunters. They just sit and wait, and then they attack, and then they let their venom do all the work, and they sit back and wait, and then they eat their meal. Okay, compared to a gopher snake that works really hard. So that's kind of the first part of the presentation about different snakes in BC. We're going to kind of switch over to learning about how I study them and why it's important that we care about snakes. So if you don't mind, Evan, this could be a moment where if there are some questions about that part of the presentation, we can address them now just before they are forgotten, or if that's easier.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself to jump in. So we do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So the first one, I'm not sure if you answered it already, but where in BC do you see the desert night snake?
Yeah, so mostly in that very southern portion. So where I was working, you can find them there, but it's very limited. We've had over the last 10 years or so, there's maybe been 3 or 4 found at my study site. But we are like a hot spot area, so they are found there. But they are really abundant. Like there's a lot of them in the States. So when I went to Arizona, I saw another night snake and I got really excited. And everyone in Arizona was like, yeah, we see them everywhere. So there's just not as many of them in Canada.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then another question about garter snakes. Why are they called garter snakes?
Garter snakes? That's a great question. I actually don't know why they're called garter snakes. I'm not sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'll have to look that one up.
I guess, yeah, just why are they garter snakes and not garden snakes?
I mean, I personally really like garden snakes, but
it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Another question, where are rattlesnakes found in BC?
Rattlesnakes. So they can be found as far north as Kamloops or just past Kamloops. That's as far as they go north. They're not found as frequently like in Vancouver over there. They're more in like central, southern BC. Yeah, but we're at the very, very tip of where they live. Kind of similar to the desert night snake. There's not like they're doing better than desert night snakes, but we're at the very northern part of where they're found. Yeah.
A bit too cold, I guess, sometimes.
Exactly. They're not as resilient. Garter snakes are found all the way up to the Northwest Territories, so very far north.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some more questions about how dangerous rattlesnakes are. So one question is, can a rattlesnake kill a human? And then with that, what do you do if you get bitten by a rattlesnake?
Yeah, good questions. So a rattlesnake can kill you. It's very rare that it'll kill you. Children are more at risk when they're bitten by a rattlesnake, and that's because you're smaller. So the venom that has gone into your body, it goes through your body a little faster than, say, maybe a large man or an adult man. So it depends how big you are. I'm a very short person and smaller person, so I am actually more at risk than some of the people that worked with me that were larger. But it also depends on where you get bit. Like maybe I got bit on my ankle. Well, that's not a big deal because it's going to take a really long time for that venom to reach my heart or maybe close my throat. But if I get bit on my neck and maybe I'm allergic to the venom, it could close my throat. So it just depends on where you get bitten. Most people, humans, get bitten on their hands because they grab the snake, not realizing it's a rattlesnake, then they get bitten. But if you get bitten, always go to the hospital, always tell someone immediately. If you're a child, tell an adult or a guardian or a teacher, and you need to go to the hospital as soon as possible. And the best thing to do if you've been bitten is honestly to just leave it alone. So if I got bit on my hand, if I was wearing like a ring or even this elastic band, I would want to take that off and have everything nice and clean and free. And then just leave it alone. Don't apply anything like a tourniquet or don't cut it. Don't put anything on it. Just leave it alone and go to the hospital. Yeah.
Good tips. I guess with that too, what should you do if you see a rattlesnake?
Yeah, so don't panic. Number one, they really aren't aggressive. Some people think that they'll chase you or come after you, and they really don't do that. The one thing that I would recommend is just stop walking. So stop what you're doing and look all around you. There might be more snakes. You don't know, like you might have come up to a couple snakes. So before you back away, you want to look all around you and then back away from the snake, give it enough room. So maybe 2 to 3 steps back. And then, just give it a wide walk around. Obviously watch where you're walking. If you're out in the environment, like somewhere where the snake should be, that's okay. But if it's in your backyard or somewhere where, the snake is too close to humans, then you might want to call a conservation officer and they can come and move the snake for you safely because they're trained. I actually trained all of our conservation officers in BC how to deal with snakes. So they're very well trained.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Good for you. There's some more questions, but just to make sure we get through your whole presentation, I'll write them down and ask later if we have more time.
Yeah.
So I guess we can just go on with the next part.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just gonna get a drink of water.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll move on. Those were great questions. Thanks, everyone. We'll get to more at the end. So next up, I just wanted to highlight to you all why you might be wondering. I mean, some of us are snake lovers. I hope there are some out there, but some people really do ask me, why the heck do we care about snakes? Why do they matter? And the answer that I give most people is they're kind of an in-between animal or a in-between species. So snakes are eaten by things and they eat things. So that's a good thing, right? Because they're someone's food and they eat their own food. Now, the importance of that is think of what snakes eat. Most snakes eat mice. There are some snakes like the garter snake that like to eat fish, but most snakes eat mice. And the reason why that's important is because if snakes weren't around to eat all those mice, we would have way too many mice. They would be all over the place. And that wouldn't be good because if you think of where I worked in the Okanagan, where people are trying to grow food, if there were mice everywhere, we would never have nice food to eat. So if the rattlesnakes are there, they're helping ensuring that there's not too many mice around. And the hawk or badger or coyote that eats the rattlesnake or any other snake, they're kind of keeping the snakes in check. So they're eating the snakes, which helps them stay healthy and have babies. So rattlesnakes are kind of that in-between species. If rattlesnakes are not doing well, they're kind of an indication that other things aren't doing well. Okay. And so they're a really good, we call them indicator species. And so we care about rattlesnakes because of that, but we also care about them because just like any other animal, maybe a bear, maybe you like bears more, maybe you like cats more, They're wild animals and they deserve to be cared about and respected, right? They're just sometimes feared by people. Okay, so on to the fun part. Well, I think it's the fun part. This is the part where I start telling you guys about what a snake biologist does and what it looks like every day, what we do. So you're probably wondering, how do I catch rattlesnakes? Well, I definitely don't catch them with my hands. I use these tools called tongs. And so those are the tools, that's the tool that I'm holding there. It's called a tong. And what that does is allows me to kind of grasp around the snake. It doesn't squeeze them too tight. It has, it only squeezes so far, and it just lightly goes around their body so that I can pick them up and move them where I need them to go. And so we use these tools to be safe. We
We're
never grab
frozen.
rattlesnakes with our hands. And honestly, I often do this with other snakes. Oh, am I frozen? Everything okay? Okay.
Just froze for a second, but
Oh, sorry, guys. So, where was I? Oh, we never grab snakes with our hands, and I catch gopher snakes with my tongs as well, because I want to make sure. Sometimes you can't tell if it's a gopher snake, right? And you're safer to just grab them with the tongs. Also, I've been bitten by a gopher snake and it hurts. So sometimes it's better to just use the tongs. When I'm out in the field as a biologist, I'm never alone. So I always have lots of people with me, and that's to make sure that I'm safe. Because if I get bitten by a rattlesnake, I definitely need a person with me to make sure that I'm safe. Okay, so what we do is every spring, we go out into these amazing, really steep areas and look for snakes. And the reason we look at in the springtime is because that's when snakes are coming out of their long winter nap. So pretty cool. The reason why we planned this talk for this time of year is because this is when snakes are waking up right now. So unfortunately, I'm at the point in my career where I don't get to do the fun stuff. So I don't get to go out and catch snakes anymore, but I used to do it for many years and it was a lot of fun. So you go out in the spring, you hike a lot, it's really tiring, and you catch snakes because snakes come out at this time of year and they kind of all hang out together and they're pretty sleepy and slow. So, they had a long nap. They're not super fast. So they're easy to catch. And we put them in these baskets like this one over here. So that's a basket of snakes. They're pretty loud. And there's a whole bunch of different sizes,
That's
ages.
a lot.
It is a lot. So they're really cool. And this is honestly not that many. Like I have had even more in a basket, and I have to go through all those snakes and take a bunch of information from them. So sometimes I'm out in the field for 10 to 12 hours. So it's really long days. So we catch a bunch of rattlesnakes, but we also catch other snakes like gopher snakes and racers in a Soyuz. So I don't catch a lot of garter snakes, but that's because it's pretty dry and hot down there. So we mostly catch the gopher snake, yellow-bellied racer, and the rattlesnakes. And this is a baby gopher snake. So that's why it's so small. Okay. So we catch these snakes, and then the next thing that we do is we tag them. So every snake gets a tag, just like your pet cat or dog. You might not know this, but vets use these there's, tons of people with the cat named Fluffy, and how would they know who is who? So they have these special little tags in them right here in the bottom corner. They're really small, and sometimes they're like even smaller in your cat or dog. They're like a microchip, and they probably put them in their ears. With snakes, we put them under their body really carefully. We're super gentle when we do this, and they don't feel it at all. It's kind of like getting your ears pierced a little bit. So each snake gets a tag, and then we measure them. So this is a video of me measuring a snake. This is actually a racer. And you'll notice that the racer is in a tube while I'm doing this. and still while we're doing this. It's also for safety. So if I'm handling a rattlesnake, it's always in a tube. And that's because if I don't have it that way, it'll bite me. And so tubing is a very special technique used by biologists. I never recommend anyone doing it. It's extremely hard to do, but that's how we handle snakes safely in the field. So what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the snake from the head to its vent, which is where it pees and poos. And so we go from the head to the vent, and we do that multiple times so that we get the correct measurement. So sometimes you have to do it 3 or 4 times if the snake's being really wiggly. Okay, so we measure them, then we weigh them. This is my friend Jade. She's weighing a rattlesnake right now. And the rattlesnake's in this bag in the bottom. It's zippered shut, so it's safe for us to handle. And then we put a little scale on it and weigh it. And this other biologist has a really important job. A lot of people think it's the boring job, but it's the most important thing is getting the data or the information for me. So she's writing down all the information, and then I take it home and make another copy of it. Next thing that we do if we're dealing with a rattlesnake is we give it a little bit of paint on its rattle. And we use a different color every year. So in 2016, we used this brown color. And then in 2017, I used this turquoise color. This gold color was the color for 2020, I believe. So we use different colors every year. And the reason why is so that we know if I catch this snake again, I'll know that it was caught in 2017 and in 2016. But also, it tells us how many times the snake has shed its skin. So you're probably like, what the heck is that? Well, snakes shed their skin. Every species of snake does this. It's not just rattlesnakes. You'll notice there's a garter snake down here, and it's shedding its skin. And they do this at about 2 to 3 times a year, depending on how healthy they are. So every time a snake grows, it sheds its skin. Okay, so if an animal has shed its skin a lot, or a snake has shed its skin a lot, it's probably quite healthy. One thing that's really cool about when snakes shed their skin is they actually shed their eye scale. So this is a racer right here, and you'll notice the eye is really bluish in color. That means it's about to shed. So that tells me as a biologist, oh, this snake is about to shed. And sure enough, you'll notice bits of skin coming off and that they're starting to get ready to do that. So on this picture below of a shed, you can actually see the eye scale. It's not just their body scales that shed, it's their eye scale as well. Okay. This upper left corner, the picture of the rattle from the rattlesnake, you'll notice that it's kind of whitish at the bottom. That's because, again, it's telling me as a biologist that snake's about to shed. So when they're about to shed their skin, rattlesnakes, they get this cool bluish color at the end of their rattle, or at the beginning of their rattle. So because we know that rattlesnakes can shed their skin every maybe 2 to 3 times a year, we can learn things about the paint that we put on there and learn about the health of the snake. So I gave this diagram here for you guys just to help. We'll just go through it together. You don't have to answer. But I wanted to show you what this would mean to me as a biologist. So I look at this rattle. I know, okay, someone caught this snake in 2016. And notice how it's at the tip of the rattle? That's because it was a baby. So it had a pre-button. So see that diagram of the little tiny segment? That's a pre-button. So when rattlesnakes are born, they have this little button and they can't make any noise. There's no noise at all. So they're actually kind of dangerous because they can't make any noise. Once they shed their skin, they get the button, which has a little tiny segment, and they can make the tiniest little sound. Okay. So someone caught it as a baby in 2016, and then I caught it the next year, and it had shed its skin once. So now let's count how many of these little segments there are to know how many times it's shed. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 segments. That means this snake has shed 5 times. And I actually caught that snake in 2018. So I know it shed 4 times since I last caught it, which means it's doing pretty well. It's quite healthy. Okay. So the last thing that I do as a biologist is probably the most important part of my research is I track them. And so the way that we track them or follow them around is by putting these little devices in them. They're called transmitters. So they're the little red pill like things. And the way we put those in the animals is with a veterinarian. These snakes are always asleep and they have pain meds, so they don't feel anything. And we put the little device in them and then we let them recover and put them back in the environment as soon as possible. Once they're back where we found them in the environment, we can track them or follow them. So this is my friend Jade, and she is tracking a snake. She's using this special device here that picks up signals from that little transmitter. So this little pale red pill makes these loud beeping noises that's picked up by this device. So it honestly sounds like beep, 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 and it gets louder when we get closer. And so we can start really far away, kilometers away, and find the snake right under the rock that it's laying under. So it's really cool technique that we use as biologists. You're probably wondering why we do this. It seems like a lot of work. Well, the reason why I did it, and many people do it, is to track where they move and to find very important habitat or places where they live or things that they use. So snakes, things that we want to learn about snakes is where do they give birth? Where do they shed? Where do they mate? What do they eat? We can learn all of these things by following them around on the landscape. So this map is showing you different snakes that I tracked. So each color is a different snake. So I start up way up in the mountains and they moved all the way down into the golf course or down into some riparian area or grassland area. So they move all over the place, which was very important for me to learn. I study pregnant rattlesnakes. So pregnant female rattlesnakes. And that's never been done before in Western Canada because it's very special research and you have to be extremely careful with them. What I learned from my research is where rattlesnakes give birth. So all of these photos here are places where rattlesnakes had their babies. And it's important we know what this habitat or this area looks like so that I and other people can protect it in the future so that rattlesnakes can continue to have their babies. We learned that they like spots with lots of rock, so lots of big rocks that they can hide under and feel safe when they're having their babies. Also, some shrubs are important as well. We also learned that sometimes more than one snake uses an area to give birth. So this rock up in the left corner had 3 females using it, whereas the one next to it only had 2. The other one only had 2, and then this one in the bottom right corner had only 1 snake. So that tells me that maybe there's not a lot of these special spots for these snakes, and that these areas are very important for them because there's so many of them using just this tiny area. So they're very important for us as biologists to learn this information. The reason why I want to know all of these things about rattlesnakes is because they are called threatened. So in Canada, we give different designations or statuses to animals. So rattlesnakes are called threatened. And what threatened means is that animals are vulnerable to endangerment in the future. Now, I did mention the word endangered in the presentation already when I talked about the sharp-tailed snake. So those snakes are endangered. And that means they're at risk of becoming extinct, which means they're no longer here. An example of an animal that's no longer here is an Indian cheetah. These animals became extinct in India due to something called desertification, which is essentially an area having no water or grass, or the land is so dry that nothing can live there. And so these animals no longer live in these areas. They cannot be found there. And so what we're trying to avoid as biologists is to avoid this from happening. We don't want rattlesnakes to become endangered or extinct. So some of the things that we're working on to help snakes, number one is roads. Snakes are really vulnerable to roads. And what I mean by that is they often get hit on roads. That's because roads usually go through really important habitat for snakes. So they move across the land and they meet a road and they usually meet a car. So as biologists, we are trying to put structures under roads so snakes can go under the road instead of on top of it. We're also trying to help them with their habitat. Remember, I told you I learned about where female snakes give birth. So that is an area that we have to try and protect and avoid people from moving there or putting houses there, or maybe putting orchards there. So this photo here is showing you, or this cartoon is showing you that when there's more houses, more orchards, maybe some cows, that takes away habitat from these animals, and usually there's fewer of them left. The last reason why rattlesnakes and other snakes are at risk and are often threatened is that people unfortunately kill snakes. And I wanted to end with this one. I know it's sad, but it's something that I think everyone should learn at all ages, that snakes need to be respected. And, you know, it's just good to give them distance. We don't need to kill them if we're scared of them. We can just back away, give them distance. And if we're really frightened, we can call someone to remove the animal safely. But we'd never want to kill them because unfortunately, that's one of the reasons why they're threatened and not doing well. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation, everybody. So thank you so much for listening. It was nice to see a few of your faces on the cameras here. And I can take some questions now if Devin wants to read them off to me. Thanks, guys. Oh, also, I just want to mention my research wouldn't be possible without all of the help from these organizations listed below. And most importantly, the Osoyoos Indian Band, they allowed me to work on their traditional lands, which I was very appreciative of. So yeah, I'll take some questions now.
Okay. So we had a couple questions. One of them was, can all snakes swim?
Yeah, actually they can. And rattlesnakes are often found in Osoyoos Lake. People will be on their boats driving around, and it's not uncommon for them to run into rattlesnakes. So yeah, all species can swim. It's just garter snakes are really good swimmers. They're definitely better than rattlesnakes at swimming.
Yeah, I've seen them like float on the water almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question was, what color did you paint the tails this year? Which leads me to ask, were you able to work with snakes this year?
No, unfortunately, I might be going down to Osoyoos at the end of April to help my friend. But that's just for fun. But I'm not sure what color she'll use this year. We try to use, we don't use like bright pink or lime green. We want to use colors that kind of blend in. So I'm not sure what color we'll use this year. I love your little snakes. I'm not sure who that is, but I love your little plushies. Very cool.
Another question. How well can snakes see when they shed? Do they go without eating for a while until they shed the scales from their eyes as well?
Yeah, excellent question. They are actually pretty blind when they're shedding, because you notice they get that kind of haze over their eyes. So often snakes, when they shed in rocks or, you know, places where they can hide because they are vulnerable. So a few times I've caught snakes while they're shedding, and they're extremely aggressive because they're blind. So that's probably the one time you really don't want to encounter a snake, or especially a rattlesnake, is when they're shedding, because they're a little more agitated and cranky.
Yeah, maybe a little scared too.
Exactly. They're afraid of us because they don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they like to hide when they do that.
That makes sense. I would too. Do you take the tracker out and replace it when they no longer work? Do you sometimes lose the snake trackers when the tracker dies or stops working?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention that, but yeah, when I'm done working with the snakes, we remove the trackers. And sometimes, unfortunately, the snakes just get lost. Like, usually we assume if we can't find a snake anymore, it's because it's been killed. So it's been eaten by a bird. And a few times I found the little transmitter, but no snake. So you can, figure out that the snake was eaten by something.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's birds because they'll pick out the tracker. They don't eat that. And so that often happens, but most of the time we get the tracker out, especially pregnant snakes. They're really good hiders. And I think I only had one snake die the entire time I studied them.
Oh, nice. How long do snakes live for?
Yeah, good question. In a zoo, they can live upwards of 25 to 30 years, but that's because they're given lots of food and they have like a perfect living situation. And of course, they don't have predators or birds attacking them. In the wild, we think, maybe live to be between 10 to 15 years old. And I had a snake that I captured. She was a female. And because at our site where we study snakes, there's been studies since 2002. And I caught her in 2018. So I knew she was at least 16 years old.
Wow.
So that was incredible. And I knew that she was even older than that because she wasn't caught as a baby. So yeah, they
Very
live a long
cool.
time. Yeah.
What months do snakes go into hibernation and for how long?
Yeah. So snakes go into hibernation around September to October when it starts getting cold. In a Soyuz, they're a bit late going into hibernation because it's warmer for much longer. But in Kamloops, it gets colder quicker. So they're usually in hibernation around end of September. And they're in hibernation until around the end of March or early April. So quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But they will come out if it's like a really warm day in the winter. There have been some people that have witnessed snakes coming out of their dens to capture the sunlight, and then they go back down into their dens. So it's not uncommon for them to poke their heads out and see what's going on.
Nice. What is BC's biggest snake?
The biggest snake is that Great Basin gopher snake, that really big snake. They get very long. They're not super big, like diameter wise, but they're really long. So they're our longest snake. Rattlesnakes don't get very big in BC compared to some of the snakes in the States. The Western Diamondback rattlesnake, for example, gets very large. And our snakes don't get that large. So they don't have as much food here. They kind of struggle in the north, so they don't get as big.
And that gopher snake was the one you had a picture of climbing out of the tree.
Yes, exactly.
Huge, yeah. Huge.
They are very big. Yeah. They're hard to handle. They're very strong.
Yeah. Just one big muscle.
Yes, exactly.
There are a lot of questions about dogs. So should you keep your dog leashed around rattlesnake territory? What happens if your dog gets bitten?
Yeah. Good question. Definitely always keep your dog leashed if you're in rattlesnake country. If you come to Kamloops when you can after COVID, definitely keep your dog on a leash. There's rattlesnakes, in a lot of different places here. And you should just keep your dog on a leash anyways, because often dogs, get people into trouble. They bring bears back to people, and they're just better to have on leash in that case if you're around wildlife. But with dogs, if they get bitten, usually big dogs are okay because it's the same idea. Remember, I said children are more at risk than like a big adult. It's the same idea with dogs. If you have a really small dog, you definitely want to be extra careful with them. And if they've been bitten, you want to take them to a vet immediately. And vets can administer anti-venom to dogs. Some dogs don't need it. I know one dog that got bit 3 times by a rattlesnake and it lived.
Whoa.
But sometimes snakes bite dogs in defense and they don't actually give any venom when they bite them. So the dog might have been bitten 3 times, but it probably got very small amount of venom. But regardless, if your dog's been bitten by a rattlesnake, just take it to a vet. Yeah.
The smart thing to do.
Yeah, just to be careful.
I saw some people had their hands up in their video. So Emmy's had their hand up for a while. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Do snakes eat snakes?
I didn't
Good
quite.
question. So it was, do snakes eat snakes?
Oh, good question. Yes, they do. So racers, do you remember the one I showed, the yellow-bellied racer? It actually eats baby rattlesnakes. So adult
Oh.
racers will eat babies. So people have witnessed that. Yeah. So snakes do eat snakes. Not often,
Crazy.
but they do. Yeah.
All right. Any other hands raised for questions? Annie?
So you talked about the, I think it was the rubber boa.
Mhm.
You mean it has no neck, right? So how do you tell if it has a neck or not?
Yeah, so good question. Snakes don't really have that neck area like humans do, right? Where, you can see where your head starts and where your shoulders are. With a snake, it's hard to tell. I would say more with a rattlesnake, you could see where its neck is because it has that triangular head. So it kind of narrows, to where the body is. But with snakes, they only have 3 parts. So they have a head, and then they have their body, so like the length of their body, and then they have a tail. So they don't really have a neck region. But good question.
I think someone else had their hand raised. Kathleen?
Does pet snakes, could they be dangerous?
Great question. With pet snakes, I don't think they can be dangerous, but you definitely have to be careful with them. Most people that get pet snakes, they get snakes like pythons or ball pythons. They're not venomous, so they're those constrictor type snakes. So they might wrap around your arm, which sometimes can get a bit uncomfortable if they wrap a little too tightly. But in my experience with snakes in captivity, they don't really do the same things that they would do in the wild. But another thing you have to be careful of is snakes biting you. So it can hurt to be bitten by a snake. And if you have a pet snake, you never want to have anything on your hands that might smell like food to them because they might mistake in your hand for food. And your snakes are going to shed, right? And if they shed their skin, they're going to be cranky. So you probably don't want to hold your pet snake when it's shedding. So there's moments where you figure out when it's safe to hold your snake and when it's probably time to leave it alone. Okay. Good question, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. We have a couple more questions in the chat. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more.
Sure.
How many baby snakes can a snake have?
Yeah. So rattlesnakes in BC, they can have between 2 to 8 babies. And they give birth to, rattlesnakes give birth to live young. So they don't deposit eggs like gopher snakes and racers. Instead, the babies develop inside them, just like humans do. And then they give birth to those babies. So they don't have as much room for a bunch of babies. So they only have about 2 to 8, whereas a gopher snake can have more. They can have 10 to 12 because they're just laying eggs.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Another question that has come up twice. If you see a snake that you think is hungry or starving, should you feed it? And what would you feed it?
I would never recommend feeding a snake in the wild just because they might get used to you feeding it and rely on that. if you see a snake that looks really sick, I would definitely call like a conservation officer or, a wildlife center and let them know and maybe stay with the snake until they can arrive and help it. Because there are situations where snakes are obviously not doing well and people need to help them. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't feed a snake in the wild. If you're feeding them in captivity, if it's a pet, you can feed them mice and rats, depending on the size of the snake. And of course, that's fine. But yeah, not in the wild.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Last question, because we're running out of time here. How far can a snake stick its tongue out?
Good question. Pretty far. I mean, you can see in this photo, like the snake has its tongue out as far as it can. So kind of like how we stick our tongues out. I would say it probably varies. An adult will have a longer tongue than a little baby. And one thing I
I
didn't
see
tell you
some
guys about,
tongues.
did I tell you?
some
I think I told them
kids-
about snakes smell the environment with their tongue. I think I did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was just seeing some tongues sticking out in everyone's videos.
Yeah, they're testing.
Everyone stick your tongue out like a snake.
But what's the difference? We only have one piece, right? Notice how the snake has two little points. And that's because they
Mhm.
use it to smell. So they need two little points so they can pick up more from the environment and bring it back into their mouth rather than just one.
So
Helps them smell
cool.
better. Yeah.
Yep, looks a little different to our tongues. Whoop.
Yes, definitely.
Well, we're almost at 7 o'clock, so I think that's about all the time we have.
Aw.
That was amazing, so interesting. So I just wanted to thank you, Dana, again for presenting to us today, and also for everyone else who called in.
Mhm.
Since this is recorded, everything will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can go look for it there. If you haven't already, be sure to join our Nature Kids BC Facebook group. You can visit us also at naturekidsbc.ca to learn more about becoming a member or signing up for our newsletter. If anyone on this call has any questions or feedback about today's Explore Day or just about Nature Kids in general, feel free to email us at info@naturekidsbc.ca. Also, keep an eye out for our next virtual Explore Day event, which will be on May 1st with Juno Award-winning children's music stars Bobs and Lolo. So yes, thanks again, everyone, for calling in. This has been so interesting.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention if any of you want to send me questions, feel free to send them to my email. It's listed there on this slide. So feel free, that's my school email. So send me a question if you didn't have a chance to today. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dana. And thanks everyone for calling in.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.